Oh, hello again. Max Kaiser here with Stacy Herbert and the Kaiser Report. Oh, it's going to be some interesting... Yep, Stacy.
I like the way you mispronounced my second name, Herbert, and it's actually Herbert.
My God.
But you know what? On the ride over to the studio this morning, you mentioned that during the last vacation period in America, which is Thanksgiving, the great migration of America, you know, when everybody goes on holiday, they go visit their family, they have Thanksgiving dinner, they usually fly, that actually went from 23% took road trips like last year in 2016, and then in 2017 it was something like 39%. And why did they take road trips instead of flying to their destination? Well, they didn't want the hassle of the U.S. dilapidated airports and the TSA, you know, the whole security apparatus, which is now kind of defunct because nobody actually even talks about the war on terror anymore. Everybody's forgotten that because now we have Russiagate. So, like, why we have this remnant? That's the last remnant of the last fake hoax scare was the whole war on terror. But, you know, in order to, you know, fix the infrastructure of America, Trump has proposed a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. $200 billion of that is going to come from the U.S. government, and the rest is supposed to come from the private sector. Therefore, mostly charging tolls, any plan that might be able to recoup their income back from the users of that infrastructure. So it's going to, you see where it will go. It'll go to the richer areas that don't even need the funds as much as the poorer areas of America. So I'm going to compare this to China, where they also, they don't have these grand announcements of infrastructure plans and hope that in 20 years it might come true and maybe the private funds will come from somewhere. They just do it. And it's quite remarkable because bullet trains are transforming the world's biggest migration. Millions of Chinese cram onto trains to make the annual pilgrimage home for the Lunar New Year holiday. It's a crowded and often uncomfortable experience that is rapidly being transformed by the country's push into the world of high-speed rail. China already has the globe's longest bullet train network, but it is plowing 3.5 trillion yuan or $556 billion into expanding its railway system by 18% over the next 2 years to 150,000 kilometers or more than 93,000 miles.
193,000 miles? Expansion in 2 years? That's amazing! Those Chinese people are ready to rock and roll in the 21st century. High-speed trains, getting home to grandma's house in just 2 hours for the whatever they have over there. Delicious stuff, dim sum, I guess. Why not? Grandma's got the best dim sum of all.
Yeah, so here we have, you know, America's needed an infrastructure plan for the last 20 years. A lot of it, you know, some of the network actually has not been replaced for 100 years. If you look at New York, a subway system, like the train under the Hudson, the tracks under the Hudson, those are 100 years old. So nothing's been touched. So this infrastructure plan that we have in America is just to replace some of the old stuff, not to expand any sort of high-speed rail like they're doing here. And remember that just 10 years ago, they had almost no bullet trains at all in China, and here they have the biggest network in the world suddenly within 10 years, and we're still twiddling our thumbs trying to determine whether or not we could afford it.
Look, there's a lot going on in what you're saying here. Part of it is that railway building is local, and you have to pay people big wages, real wages, not minimum wage, to build stuff locally. America is an economy that's been created by financialization of everything and outsourcing manufacturing to countries like China. Totally at the ignoration, it just made that word up. It means to ignore something. The ignoration of your local infrastructure build. Now, Trump's saying, we want to do infrastructure. We've got to go borrow $1 trillion or $2 trillion. From who? Our biggest creditor? That would be China again. China's owning all the cards now in the 22nd century, and America can't even get from point A to point B because Amtrak is just going to skip and pop over the rail. You can't get anywhere on Amtrak without derailing every single day. Amtrak derails again, because it's junk.
Well, but we also have a plunder class. So no plan, no national policy. Like China has industrial policy. We've covered that before. We have de-industrial policy here. And it's a plundering, like how to plunder any of the assets that are there. This is the private equity model. It became popular on Wall Street while you were there in the 80s. And now it's our national economic policy is to plunder as much as possible. And, you know, a few guys get to keep it, and then the rest gets, you know, whatever their needs are, the plunder class, whatever their needs are, they just outsource it to China to make. In the meantime, vast fortunes are being made in China. Here we have, even the policies that are being presented by Donald Trump's administration, you see the original plans already they were created by Wilbur Ross and one other guy from the administration long ago, like a few years ago, and it's basically a way to plunder because, okay, $200 billion from the U.S. government, just like the $200 billion sent to Afghanistan or Iraq, it just disappears. It evaporates into thin air, into the pockets, the offshore bank accounts of some of these guys, and then it trickles down. So of the $200 billion going towards the U.S. infrastructure, maybe $2 billion will make it to the ground, to paying some laborers, to paying for some tar, or for the macadam roads out there, for the, that's all that will make it to the ground. So there's a huge, you have to throw a lot of money just to get a little tiny bit to the ground here.
Right, because there's middlemen all along the way taking their cut. Same thing in the medical industry, obviously. It costs the most expensive any in the world because of all the middlemen, the administrators. The administrators are growing exponentially, the doctors are not. And same thing in infrastructure build. So China is a state directed infrastructure project from the state. America would like to bring in private enterprise, but private enterprise, unfortunately, is unregulated. There are no laws that apply to private enterprise, particularly in the financial industry. So therefore, the cost skyrocketed, even compared to the government famous $500 hammers that we hear about at the Pentagon. If you throw it to private equity, all they're going to do is extract all the money and send it offshore. So that China's
the private companies, their number one obligation is to their shareholders or their investors, and it's way more profitable just to plunder. Like, why actually the cost of buying the steel, paying the workers, finding the workers to lay the tracks, to fix that's like really expensive and time consuming when you could just like throw a piece of old steel out there and hope it doesn't, the train driving over it doesn't derail, and instead just take the billions of dollars. We have the same system in Hollywood. That's why our films here cost $200 million, because there's 1,000 middlemen, many of them rapists apparently, but they're like plundering that system. Every single system in America has like thousands of middlemen. Just the education system, it's now the cost of education, university has exploded like 1,000% since you and I went to university, because we have now a whole bunch more administrators, not more teachers, not more professors, a lot more administrators though.
Right. And look, I mean, the United States had a state-directed infrastructure project under Eisenhower, the interstate highway system, which set the stage for the American century. We haven't had NASA put a man on the moon, which created Intel, Google, Apple, IBM, created America's technology superstars. Mm-hmm. But, the government is now gun-shy about doing anything for two reasons. It's broke, and there's no talent there.
And you might say he was General Eisenhower, so a military man, Republican, right-wing, and the highest tax rate at that time was 90%. So it was, a different sort of time. And we were we weren't yet clearly the empire, because that was after World War II, and, Britain still kind of had like the remnants of empire. They still had some of their holdings. But back in China, here their infrastructure is like quite amazing. The numbers are amazing. Almost non-existent in China a decade ago. High-speed rail has exploded, with more than half of the 25,000-kilometer network built between 2013 and 2017. The plan is to expand it by more than 50% by 2025, with 8 main bullet train lines running from east to west by 2030. China intends to have another 8 main lines running from north to south as well. And actually, the cost is very competitive. That's why more people this past Chinese New Year has just traveled by high-speed rail rather than the conventional rail. But you compare that to like New York City, which has been trying to build that subway line, the number 2 line, for about 70, 80 years. And then it went like 10 times over budget, and it was just like a mile long. It was like hardly anything. And it took years and so many layers of administrative they went over the cost. It was a great article recently where they went over the cost of why it was so expensive to build in New York City. And they had to have like 3 people who operated the elevator, but there was no elevator there. Like there was an elevator, a lift, but it was automatic. So there's nobody that actually needed to press any button. But they had to have them by law in these 3 guys that were elevator attendants who just stood there all day making $150,000 a year.
Right. So that's not a very efficient way to run an economy. That is for sure. And so if competitively, this is, we put a Tesla into outer space. Okay, that was good. I don't know. China's not too concerned about that. But,
well, yeah, because putting a Tesla into outer space makes a great, extravaganza. But those extravaganzas like Hyperloop and the private sector is only going to deliver to billionaires like Elon Musk who have the money to blow in sending Teslas into outer space. Here, China, the national, they have the industrial plans, they have 5-year plans, they don't want to leave the entire rural class abandoned because they know they have to include them into their economy to sustain and maintain their position at the top of the global economic infrastructure. So they need to include these people in, and if it costs money to bring them in, just like West Germany had to bring in East Germany and spend $1 trillion. Here, China is also a mercantilist state, just like Germany, and they have to include all these people. America, where it's just like abandon those people out in the Rust Belt, out in the middle of America, it's like, fend for yourself, dudes.
Well, I mean, the UK is kind of similar, right? The whole northern area of the country, they keep discussing, should we build a railway to the north?
For 20 years.
Right, include the people from Manchester and Birmingham and Sheffield. Should we include them into our economy in London? And, for 20 years they've been having this debate, and there's still this division going on. So the Chinese are saying, you know what, we're going to grow the economy by actually making it an inclusive economy and building infrastructure appropriately.
Yeah, so they're bringing in the West, and a lot of naysayers in the Western world, the Western economy, the likes of the academia economists from New York have always poo-pooed their plan for high-speed rail that they've been building across China, saying the peasants will never be able to afford it. But apparently, according to the data from this past year, that the peasants are affording it. So it is actually becoming viable, and people are using it because their incomes are going up because we've outsourced all our jobs there.
Right. Maybe they'll build a stop on their railway system right here at the Kaiser Report. Well, don't go away. Stay right there. A little break. When we come back, we're actually going to go to China using the magic of television and talk with someone in China. Stay right there.